Good evening, everyone. This is a pre-application open house for a proposed 9-story building that is at the corner of Richmond and Churchill at 327 Richmond Road. We're hosting this tonight with the CLV group, who are the applicants for the zoning. This is our first webinar, in case you haven't been able to tell thus far. Appreciate your patience that you can give us with the technical aspects of it. Give us any feedback afterwards on how you would like these to go in future. So shortly, I'm going to turn it over to CLV Group to introduce their team and to run through their proposed development. After that, as we normally do, we're going to have a question and answer period. There is at the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A button. You can use that to type in your questions. If you have comments that you want to make with the questions, feel free to type those in as well. And then Fiona's going to moderate the Q&A with those questions that come in using those typed questions. We also have polling questions. Fiona, that sounds interesting. At some point, and then we've already had, we've been crashed by one person who a bit disrespectful. I guess that was a bot. But we are keeping the same ground rules that we do with our in-house open houses. Let's keep it civil and make sure that the input is constructive. At some point, this application is going to be filed. At that point in time, the application will have a lead planner with the city and be subject to further formal feedback. Kirsten Neutral is here on the call, and I'm assuming that Kirsten will be the lead planner on this one.
No, so, Jeff Kirsten's with FOTEN.
I'm sorry. That's not new. Do we have a city planner with us tonight?
Yeah, no, unfortunately the city planner was not able to participate, but it will be Andrew McCreet, and he may tune in to view this, and we're recording this and we'll send this to him as well.
Can we start over if we're recording?
Pardon?
He's with FOTEN. I was gonna ask, can we start over? And then feel free to submit any further feedback to us now, as CLV is looking for your comments before they submit. You can send comments to my office via jeff.leeper@ottawa.ca or Fiona Mitchell, who is on the screen now, at Fiona Mitchell, fiona.mitchell@ottawa.ca. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Evan with CLV to introduce his team. And I'm just wondering, can we take the screen share off just so people can get the faces?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
Thanks. And I'll mute myself.
So Rael, it looks like Rael has maybe just stepped away there. Rael, do you mind just taking the screen share off?
Yep, no problem.
Perfect, thank you. Great. So everybody should now be able to see our group here. So thank you, Jeff. Yeah, I did want to take just a second to thank Councillor Leeper, thank Fiona, and the rest of the team at the Councillor's office. I mean, it's been a bit of a process to get here, but here we are with the online format. And so far so good. So we'll see how the rest of it goes here, but we're excited that we have this opportunity to be able to share our project despite the situation that's currently going on right now. I also wanted to take a minute to thank everybody who's here tonight. It looks like we have almost 40 attendees in the meeting, which is really, really great. So thanks everybody for coming out, taking some time out of your evening, and also for accommodating the online platform that we're using here. So a little bit different, but happy to be able to share our project there. So in terms of some introductions here, my name is Evan Johnson. I'm here on behalf of the applicant for the site. Semantics a little bit, Jeff, but the applicant for the site will be Interrent REIT. Anyway, Interrent is an Ottawa-based company. It's an Ottawa-based rental apartment landlord, and we have a fairly large presence in the National Capital Region. You may have seen some of our signs around town. But we also do own and we operate some other properties down through up in Montreal, through southwestern Ontario as well. We always have a focus, which is really just on our residents' experience first, in giving back to our communities, whether that's through reinvestment in some of our different properties, through charitable giving, and lots of other ways as well. So that's a little bit about myself, about the company InterRent. And at this point, I want to introduce the rest of the team. So also from InterRent, here is Josie, who's on the line. So she and I will be able to answer any questions that you might have about InterRent, and maybe some questions about the project as well. We also have Kirsten and Brian, who are here from FOTEN. FOTEN's a planning company. They're both planners, and they will answer any questions that you have about the municipal planning side of things. We have Rael LaBelle and Barry Hoban, who are here from Hoban Architecture. They're here to answer any questions that you have on the design of the building or anything like that. Also online is Mark Crockford. He's a transportation engineer who's here to answer any questions that you might have about traffic or transportation or anything else. So in a couple minutes here, I'll just pass things off to Kirsten and Rael, who can go into a little bit more detail about the project overall. But I did want to take a bit of time just to emphasize how excited we are about this. I mean, I think that it's pretty easy to get excited about the Westboro neighborhood here, where we think that this is a really great project and a good addition to the neighborhood. And this is something it's been a bit of a process to date. And I mean, we've had some ongoing conversations with the councillor's office now for I think a couple of years, or maybe about a year and a half now. So we're excited to see how far it's come, and we're excited for your comments as well. But at the same time, I do also want to make it really clear that it is still early. It's early in the process. We have not put in our application yet, and we're here to get some feedback in the meantime, right? So we will be submitting what you are seeing today as part of our zoning bylaw amendment. And Kirsten will go into a little bit of details about what sort of the whole process is going to look like from start to finish. But I do really want to make it clear that our intention is that we're going to take what we have today and make that as part of our actual submission. And then it will be further down the line that we are going to start to look at all the comments that we're getting. So we're going to get comments here tonight. We're going to get comments from city staff after our application goes in. We're even going to get comments from the broader public. And we're going to take all those comments at that time. And once we get everything in, then we're going to start to take a look at, okay, which of these comments do we need to start to take into consideration in order to balance the needs? Because everybody's going to have some different perspectives, and we want to make sure that we get all that, we piece it together, and then start to make the changes based on the comments at that point. So just want to make sure that that's clear. If anybody wants any clarification on on that, definitely feel free to let us know. So with all that, I do want to pass it off to Kirsten at this point, who's going to go into a bit of detail about the municipal policy, and then Rael can talk a little bit about the building design and architecture.
Okay, thanks, Evan. Good evening, everybody. As Evan mentioned, my name is Kirsten Nitcha. I'm a planner with FOTEN. And so before I do a brief overview of the policy, I think I just want to reiterate what both Councillor Leeper and Evan have said, that so this is just the beginning of the process. We're gathering input today and leading up to the application. So InterRent has also attended an informal UDRP session where they've had a review by the panel members and gotten feedback through that mechanism. And once the applications are submitted, so there will be a zoning bylaw amendment together with a site plan control application. Those applications will be posted online, and Councillor Leeper will also post in his newsletter on the website, and residents will have that opportunity to provide their comments. As Fiona mentioned, the file lead is Andrew McCrate. I don't know if he's able to attend tonight, so any comments you have or share today, please definitely send those on to Andrew as well. You can send those immediately, or you can send those through the DevApps website, or you can wait to, once you get the notification as well. So, so that's just a brief overview of that process. You'll have plenty of opportunities to contribute, as everybody has mentioned today. And so just looking at the policy framework, we're looking at the property today at 319 to 327 Richmond Road, as well as the property at 381 Churchill and 380 Winona. So together, those are the development site. And those properties lie within the Richmond Road traditional Main Street, as well as down Winona Avenue and Churchill Avenue. So as mentioned, this will be going through a zoning bylaw amendment. And so we're looking at increasing the height. So the policies for traditional main streets do support higher heights, and specifically within the secondary plan. So the secondary plan applicable to the site is the Richmond Road Westboro secondary plan. And when looking at this neighborhood, higher heights are permitted in locations where there's the ability to provide a community focus and to provide transition, and to also bring in, the pedestrian-oriented activities, to the street network. So that's the zoning bylaw amendment portion of that we'll be looking at, increasing the height and looking at the transitions and those pedestrian focus and that community focus as well at Churchill and Richmond. And then there will be a site plan that goes into the detailed component of that. So I know Rial will provide you a little bit more overview as he goes through the slide about the context. I'm sure residents know that you are very familiar with this site. So right now, you have, two-story development there. So we're looking at that intensification that's supported by the official plan as well. And also the site is within close proximity of two transit stations. So both Westboro and Dominion transit stations within 600 meters. So all this together presents itself for, an opportunity to bring intensification and, new development and pedestrian-oriented uses to that, to Richmond Road on a site that currently is a little bit underutilized within the neighborhood itself. So that's just a brief summary of the policy. You'll see more information within the planning rationale that goes with the application, and as we move forward through the process. So I'll turn it over to Rial to provide an overview of the development itself.
Over the screen sharing, I don't know if Fiona, maybe you could provide that opportunity for me.
You're still a co-host, so you should be able to share.
Okay, perfect. So good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. You'll notice that I'm looking towards you in this view, and then sometimes I'll be panning over and looking at the larger screen, which is what you're visualizing. So it's a little bit like we would be standing in the room together, where I'd be facing an audience and then looking at the boards on the wall. So bear with me as I walk you through some of these slides in order to basically give you a good understanding of, obviously, your neighborhood, the context, and how we've designed this building to sort of nestle its way, or to nestle into the site. So I'm going to take you through various slides here, and I'm going to So just to start off, an overview of the Westboro neighborhood. I want to just bring a couple of things into focus here. Our site, obviously, right at the corner of nestled between Winona and Churchill, located on Richmond Road. Just to the west is one of our recently completed projects, Westboro Station, which is quite a large block. As you can see there, there's a two-phase approach, single tower, as well as two mid-rise components on a podium. We have the two future LRT transit stations that are planned along the north side along Scott, and just to the south you can see the Byron Street spanning from east to west, just a block away. Churchill being, another important slide to identify here is some of the contextual photos. You'll note, as you know, the street is lined with 1 to 3 story mixed use commercial retail blocks, as well as mid-rise residential blocks. So there's quite a variety of scales, and as things intensify, obviously we'll begin to see a little bit more consistency along the street wall. But really, the important thing to note here is that there is a 1 to 3 story presence on this street that is quite that sets up your street level experience. So as we walk you through our design, you'll notice that we've designed elements in the building to really capture that experience along Richmond, which is very an important aspect of scale. Some of the other street walls flanking along Richmond. And these are some of the views looking north along Winona and Churchill. This slide is, again, if you look at that green dot at the center of the screen, is where our site is. And really, spanning from Island Park to our, just a little bit past our project at Westboro Station, you can see we're situated at the heart of Westboro. And we see this site as an important site for the community, where major festivals that occur, this will be a crossroads that will inevitably become an important piece in the future. So as we focus on start to focus on the themes that shape the design for this, you'll notice that we will take careful consideration with site access and loading. The Main Street activation is a very important feature, obviously, given a traditional Main Street on Richmond and a general mixed-use street on Churchill, and then more of a residential street over on Winona. So three very different streets, but at the same time, very active, and the requirements to keep this Main Street activation is important. We have some landscape and courtyard features that are quite prominent on the site that will allow the building to sit nicely on site and engage and provide outdoor spaces for the community as well as for the local residents. We've got special attention to podium and materiality, as I was explaining the street wall. Pardon me. In this general neighborhood, it's a very important scale for that street. And then we look at the main entrance and the corner public plaza, creating a feature element that will become an iconic, a wayfinding feature for the neighborhood, but an iconic element that everyone will be able to reference. And then, of course, there's the building form and the features that we will sort of elaborate on moving forward. So I mentioned site access and loading. I mean, first off, the important feature was to pull the main access to parking garage away from the main street. It was intended to focus as much active linear frontage on the streets as possible and not have any blank zones. You'll notice the loading aisle is the loading for move in, move out, as well as for garbage, is located accessible through a rear laneway off of Winona. And again, removing all move-in trucks and other unsightly practical everyday uses outside of away from the main streets. We focused a lot of energy at the corners, Richmond and Churchill and Winona and Richmond, where those are the pedestrian access points. So the Main Street activation, this is one of the images here that allows us to begin to engage with the corner plaza and identify the scale of the building using a building step back. So we've actually pulled the building an extra 2 meters away from the street wall or from the property line so that we can expand the sidewalk and provide a more comfortable pedestrian environment, as well as scaling back the building from the corner to begin to open up that corner to allow a variety of uses to occur within that corner plaza. you'll notice in this image, the landscape courtyard at the back, which is connected through a rear laneway, is intended to be an active zone that connects through to the corner plaza. There is a common lobby that connects the both exterior spaces together, which allows the retail tenants to make use of that glorified vestibule, if you will, as a connection point. The rear laneway acts as a mews to provide access to that courtyard, and that courtyard will be designed as an interior space, obviously shaped by the shape of the building, but isn't intended necessarily to be fully. It's more of an intimate zone that allows the overlap between mixed use and the local residents to occur. So small restaurants could expand their spaces into that courtyard and still be able to function as a mixed use space where local residents could come in with their bikes off the back and access bike parking, or even sit out in that courtyard. There is a significant planted edge along the north property line, which allows a comfortable buffer for neighboring properties to sort of appreciate a planted edge as opposed to a completely exposed edge. So we do want to sort of identify that as an important landscape interface between the northern property line and our development. Again, street trees flanking the streets, animating the streets along the edge. When we start looking at the building code and materiality, an important note is that on Winona, we have a street wall of approximately 3 stories, 2 to 3 stories, and we've created a building step back that allows that street wall to connect with the street. And similarly on Churchill, we played around with this idea of a 1-story street wall and then a building step back. But of course, that ground floor plan is a little bit higher, so it acts more as a 1.5-story building height. I talked briefly about the main entrance and creating an iconic feature at the corner. This is a place very similar to what exists currently in the neighborhood at Westboro Station with the Clock Tower Brew Pub. Only in this case, again, very similarly, it does allow for, because the main entrance is also located at the corner, it's always going to be a vibrant space, people coming in and out of the building, local residents, as well as patrons making use of that retail space at ground level. So a lot of interaction and a lot of overlap between public and private. The corner itself, I should identify the corner, that it's aspirational at this point, but it would be really interesting to see what kind of coordination we can have with the city in terms of trying to expand the ground plane into the intersection, where we can start to look at texturing pavers and really allowing this entire intersection to become a sort of an interruption in asphalt and become a center, so that when there are festivals like Westfest, this really can become a really grand space and expand beyond the property lines of each property, but right into the street. So that's aspirational, but we'll continue that discussion moving forward. Some of the building forms and features. An important one to note is the 45-degree plane that's a very important piece to transition this 9-story building mass down to that 3-story neighborhood, or 2 to 3-story neighborhood. It's a feature that allows us to create a 7.5-meter rear lane access. That's the building offset at the back, and then we step that at a 45-degree plane until we get to the 8th floor, and then we, on top of that, we actually animate the building stepping with private terraces throughout. So they're not just blank facades; these are active spaces to allow the building to again transition from the main street down to that residential neighborhood. At the corner of Richmond and Winona, as well as that feature at the corner of Churchill and Richmond, I talked about these elements that animate the corners that become the iconic pieces at the corners that make, there's a fabric of the building, this macro grid of red brick that is sort of at the center, but these corner elements break down the mass. So again, there's a step back, a building step back at the 3rd floor, and then there's another building step back at the 7th floor, making the 8th and the 9th floor recede back, and then a material change, again, to really try and emphasize the scale, break down the scale of that building and emphasize the lower parts. These are diagrams that help to break down the elements I just finished talking about. So again, level 1 building step back, the corner plaza, the corner identity element, which is currently a clock tower. It's not to say that it's going to end up being a clock tower. It's just we're open to, you'll see that there'll be some questions. There's a poll that's going to go out to the community, and we're looking for ideas. We'd like to know what you think can work as an iconic piece at this corner, and we're open to other ideas that will allow us to evolve the design moving forward. Some other views, this one along Richmond Road. So this is basically the south elevation. Again, this idea of a base setting up the street wall. There's the body of the building at the top floors, and then the very, very top steps back again so that it minimizes the impact of scale on the street. And then another view on Winona, same idea. Level 3 building step back, a corner public plaza again, and then the 45-degree plane at the back, which allows the building to actually step down and transition to a lower scale neighborhood. So that's it for the presentation, and back to you, Fiona, in order to take the Q&A.
Thank you, Rael. Do you want to keep sharing your screen, or do you want to stop?
If there's any questions, I can flip through some of the slides to identify some visuals that might help answer some of those questions.
Okay.
That could be a good idea to leave it up there.
So I'll flip all the way back to the beginning, and then as the questions are asked, I'll see if I can find a slide that relates.
So I will launch the poll questions. And folks can respond to those, but now we would invite you to type your questions into the Q&A box, and we'll take them in order that they come in. So here is the poll, should have popped up on your screen. So you can take a second to answer those questions. And if you're not interested in answering them, or after you've done so and you have a question, just type it in the Q&A box below.
Just for some additional clarity on the poll questions, there is one question that talks about the interior courtyard and the programming of the interior courtyard. So just for everybody's reference, maybe Rael, you can point out in the bottom left corner there what the interior courtyard is that we're talking about. Yeah, exactly. So that's the one that's on the interior of the building, as opposed to the one that's on the corner of the building, right at the corner of Richmond and Churchill.
So with no questions coming in yet.
Oh, we have one question, Jeff.
Oh, sorry. Okay, go for it.
With the roof stuff, not sure what it's intended for up there. It looks like an 11-story building, not 9 stories. Can you please clarify?
I can go ahead and answer that. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Please go ahead.
So an important piece that I didn't touch on, I apologize for that. So this is a 9-story building, and as a permitted projection, if you will, the client is actually looking to mask this idea. As you see in a lot of these larger buildings, there's a large mechanical penthouse up there. The idea is to actually wrap this penthouse with and animate the rooftop with some interior space and some outdoor amenity space, but it's all communal space and there are no residences up at the top. So it's really intended to be, because of its U-shaped form, we're intending to actually animate all the sides of the building on the rooftop so that they take advantage of views towards the city and views towards the north, towards the river.
Thank you,
And
Rael.
I should mention as well as there is a significant buffer from the edge of these rooftop terraces to the edge of the building so that it minimizes any overlook. Or actually, there is no overlook because it's set back so far from the edge of the building. So just an important piece.
Okay, thank you, Rael. Questions are coming in fast and furious, so I'll just read them in the order that they are coming. This one's a little tricky. How will you compensate the neighbors who will lose their direct access to sunlight they have enjoyed since the beginning of Westboro? That might be a planner question. I'm not sure. I'll let you guys decide.
Yeah, Kirsten, hoping that you can handle that one, please.
Sure. Oh, sorry, excuse me. So within Ottawa, we do, the official plan does require that all developments to look at the impacts with relation to views and to shadows. So you'll see those shadow studies when you get the application or when the application is posted online. And of course, the applicant team and the architecture team, as Rael noted, there is quite a lot of step back. So that 45-degree plane is intended to mitigate those shadows and that impact and views. So the shadow study will show that, you know, this is an urban context and the shadows do move quite quickly across the neighboring properties. So I believe that the applicant team would agree that the impact is minimal and is to be expected in this sort of context.
Okay, thank you, Kirsten. Next question. I like this design. Just to get the size, would this open square be bigger than the current bike shop? Just trying to get an idea.
Yeah, Rael, maybe you can flip to some of those pages with the current site conditions, just so that people can, again, try and picture what the size of the site is like and speak to that, please.
So I guess I could say that, sorry, should I answer the question? Am I the one who's nominated?
Please, yeah, sorry, thank you.
So I want you to pay close attention to the image I have up on the screen where it says project site. And I think it's important to note the scale of the existing building that's there now, the Westboro Station, the bike shop. That's essentially the scale of the corner plaza that we're proposing. Actually, is a pretty good comparison if I was to give you a reference point. The interior courtyard is, again, it's shaped by the building, but it's a 16-meter wide by 30-meter long courtyard. So a really good size and a comfortable space to program with a variety of uses.
Okay, thank you, Rael. Next question. I understand there used to be a gas station there. What are the safety measures?
Kirsten, do you mind speaking a little bit to the extent of the environmental investigation and remediation that we're going to need to do?
Of course. So as part of an application, the city and the province require that all applications go through a phase 1 environmental site assessment. So that has to be done and submitted with the application. And the consultant who undertakes that study will also note if further investigation or further environmental assessment is required. So, and if further assessment is required, that's called a phase 2 environmental site assessment. And so that will also be required to be submitted and reviewed by the city as well as the province, the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks. And depending on the use and the level of contaminants, there might be a requirement for a record of site conditions. So, yeah, so that and that ensures that the change of use meets all provincial standards with regard to environmental protection and safety. So those studies will be posted online with the application, if necessary.
Okay, thank you. Next question, do you have any interior space design? I'm assuming like interior plans more refined.
I'd be interested in hearing about unit mix as well in that answer.
Rael, do you mind speaking to that?
Yeah, I could. So essentially, we've outlined on the ground floor, starting with the ground floor, we've outlined approximately 19,000 square feet of retail space. As you step up, the floors 2 to 9 include, again, it's a very early stage, but it's a preliminary unit mix at approximately 180 units. And then there's the rooftop terraces, the terrace amenity, which again remains to be decided in terms of how much area we're providing up there, but that's essentially the breakdown. We haven't gotten into the suite layouts yet. It's very early. We're still looking at what the overall market is going to absorb in terms of 1 bedrooms and 2 bedrooms and bachelors. So all of this is still on the table and up for discussion.
Okay, thank you. Next question. From the street level, pedestrian level, can you speak to the apparent massing of this building and how that compares with Westboro Station, which in my opinion is an ideal blend of separating the pedestrian level experience with the high-rise nature of the building?
Perfect. I've got the right slide to talk about it now. So at the bottom right-hand side, the scale of the building at Westboro Station shows you a really good example of a retail street wall, which is a single story, but it's actually a 1.5-story height. And then above that is another three stories of mass. So it's a very comparable scale with some minor offset variations between for the building step backs. You know, we're not necessarily identical, but we're very close. That is actually one of the example projects that we, pride ourselves with, and we think it's a good scale for the neighborhood. And we're, although the scale of this site is much different, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, the building modules that you experience walking down the street are very similar in this project to the Westboro Station.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, from the top of Byron, what does the elevation look like? Meaning, is the 4th floor kind of the equivalent height of Byron? I think because it slopes up to the south.
Good question. Very good question. In fact, it is exactly that, where if you're at the top of Byron, this building, you'd be essentially in line with the 4th floor. That'd be a very close approximation. So that's just to identify that on this elevation. That's this floor up here.
Okay, thank you. This isn't a question, but I'll read it out loud. Someone is saying that a microbrewery or a winery would be nice in the retail units. So thank you for that comment. Next question, how many families are you expecting to live in it? I wonder if the neighborhood is ready for it, schools, etc.
Yeah, for sure. So I'll take the first piece of the question, which is about families and the demographics. We're still very much early stages at this point, so we don't have like a complete grasp quite yet on who we expect might actually be occupying the building. But we'll certainly take into consideration what the unit sizes and the unit mixes start to look like, depending on what the expectation is for the different demographics that are moving into the building. Absolutely. Now, in terms of the neighborhood amenities, Kirsten, maybe you can speak to a little bit to how the neighborhood amenities respond to these types of projects.
Sure, thanks, Evan. So with respect to schools specifically, so for all new developments, all the school boards are circulated on the application so that they have a chance to review it and provide comments to the city. It also gives the schools a chance to, I guess, to monitor activity and the number of residents within the neighborhood and then plan accordingly. As we all know, school accommodations are pretty complex. So they are involved. As this isn't a new community, the schools are there. It would just be a matter of, monitoring the number of residents coming and going. So they will be involved and they have that chance to comment. So, with respect to the other amenities, for example, parkland, for this development where parkland, the site is quite small in the large scheme of things. So parkland dedication in the form of cash in lieu of parkland would be a condition of approval. And of course, those monies go to both the ward and the city to provide those amenities to residents as the city grows and as the ward intensifies. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Next question, how will Interrent give back to Westboro in terms of the charitable giving to the community mentioned by Evan?
I can take this one. So I think for right now, we would just want to have some continued conversations with the community just to see what the needs are before we sort of make any decisions about where we'll be contributing to the community. So we'll just look for some feedback through this process, through the ZBA process, and then we can proceed and have some discussions on what that might look like.
This will be subject to Section 37. There's a reasonably significant uplift that's happening here. And I don't think we've chatted about what that Section 37 should go toward, unless we have and I've forgotten. But there is a community benefit that comes out of rezonings where there is additional value created through the uplift of what the zoning is compared to what they get if they get it.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. Are we ready for the next question? Yeah, okay. Why are the building steps so narrow and few on the Richmond and Churchill sides and no terraces on those sides?
Rael, maybe you can address that one.
So first, the terracing that you're referring to is, I'm assuming, at the street wall. Can we ask, can you read that question again, Fiona? I'm just wondering, are we talking about terracing or are we talking about building step backs?
Verbatim, why are the building steps so narrow and few on the Richmond and Churchill sides and no terraces on those sides?
I think that's the step backs.
Yeah, so the focus is to try and create a street wall, as I was talking about, on both Richmond, Churchill, and Winona, and they relate to each of the streets. So Churchill and Winona, or Richmond and Winona, enjoy a 3-meter sort of building wall with a 2-meter offset at the top, and then on the Churchill side, we expressed a single-story podium, which is the retail height, and then we created another 2-meter offset there. The terracing really happens at the back for the building to transition to the lower scale, the residential neighborhood. So on a traditional Main Street, we felt that creating the step backs at those levels, and then another step back at the above the for the floors 8 and 9 was more relevant to kind of create this mid-rise 6-story mass or 7-story mass on the Main Street, which is that red brick component. And then up above, we use a transition of material to recede the 8th and 9th level with another 2 meters. So,
if I may ask, you did, I don't know, I presume you were involved with the Taggart building at Rosemount?
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering if you can compare it to that building.
Yeah.
And then the other building that we always talk about in this ward, of course, is the Ashcroft Convent buildings, which have, I don't think anyone disagrees that they've been a negative, or they've been to the detriment of what the street feels like. So we are particularly sensitive to any kind of street wall that is going to replicate the feeling of that canyon through the Q West developments.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, so an irrelevant point here that you made, Jeff, is the length of the site in totality, right? And so what we're trying to frame here is an experience like the building at Rosemount, which is a 6-story building, using this red brick massing, and then the building step back for the 7th and 8th floors, or the 8th and 9th floors, which actually allows you to focus on that red brick, and then everything else is almost background and sort of recedes from the main street. And then when you consider the building massing that Ashcroft had developed on Richmond near Patricia, that massing is, the length of that site is substantial to the point where there is no break in the facade. In fact, it's a street, it's a complete wall, and there's no effort to create building step back between the retail ground plane and then the floors up above. It's literally just a wall, and it's probably very similar to the length of the site at Westboro Station, which is 3 buildings. So, and again, that building that Ashcroft has designed is 3 buildings. It's a significantly larger site. So this is very much, you experience the building on Richmond, you experience that wall on Richmond Road. It's articulated to bring those datums that exist on the street today. And it's very much the scale of Rosemount in terms of its length.
Okay, are we ready for the next question? Thank you. Is this a rental building? What is the anticipated range of unit sizes?
So I can take that one. Yeah, the answer is yes. The expectation, well, yes, this will be a rental building. In terms of unit sizes, again, it's still very much early days, so that isn't something that we've quite nailed down yet. So certainly open to input on that too, if people want to leave comments in the Q&A section about what they'd like to see here as well.
Okay, thank you. Okay, this design looks similar to the development Mizrahi, the one on Island Park and Richmond Road. Their initial designs were not approved due to the architecture being too boxy. Any comment?
Maybe Rael, do you want to try and help us with a bit of a comparison, just because that's a project I think that people are pretty familiar with?
Well, I was hoping this building would be compared to the Mizrahi building, just to start off. Not one of my favorite designs for the neighborhood, for sure. But I guess we could talk about scale and mass. And really, this is quite different. And again, the building step backs that I explained in the presentation are a lot more pronounced in this design than they are in the Mizrahi design. I think that we shouldn't draw parallels there. And Mizrahi, I believe, is 12, if not 14 stories. 12. So 12. So again, different buildings, different building design, different materials. I don't know where to draw the comparisons, except that we definitely have more articulation in this in terms of the comment, in terms of the boxy-ness of this. I think, again, I think my comment about the building step backs address that. I mean, this is what this building does, is it creates datums that relate to the existing scale of the neighborhood.
And Kirsten, maybe you can speak a little bit about the upcoming UDRP process and design due diligence, I guess, that happens at the city as well, just to help with the comfort there.
Yeah, sure. So as I mentioned, as part of this pre-application and leading up to the application process, application's already been reviewed informally by the Urban Design Review Panel. So they have provided some comments, and we'll receive comments, from residents as well as the councillor and the city through the application process. And another component of that formal commenting period is the formal review by the Urban Design Review Panel. And so they'll be looking to see how this building responds to the comments, the submission, and any changes that respond to the comments that they've initially made with respect to urban design, and so as Rael mentioned, a lot of the urban design comments look at the massing, the step backs, the transition, the pedestrian linkage, through the courtyard, etc. So there is that process that will ensure that the building continues to be fine-tuned and meets the needs of the applicant and addresses those urban design comments as well.
Thank you. We've talked about this a little bit, but I'll put it out there. What demographic do you expect to occupy the building?
Yeah, I think again at this point it's still part of our diligence process that needs to come.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, may I, if
Yeah.
I may just jump in on that one? It's not going to be cheap housing, right? Like it's going to be fairly high end.
The idea is that it will be market housing, yes.
So and in Westboro at this location, the location is going to come with a premium.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose if the question is about really about the rate or the sort of the asking rents on the units, the answer is that the intention is that they will be market rates. And I guess in terms of the demographics, again, we still need to complete our diligence to figure out whether that looks like families or young couples or singles or whatever those groups might start to look like.
It'll certainly be a wide range of unit sizes.
I just I've seen that come a couple of times, and I think Westboro residents, we're becoming more and more concerned about the affordability in the neighborhood, and so I suspect that is behind some of the questions that are coming up. But I just wanted to put that out there that it's not going to be inexpensive housing. Anyone who's going to be able to afford to live in this building, I'm guessing, is going to be relatively well off.
Okay, Barry Hoban just wanted to jump in and make a few comments before moving on, so I'm going to let him do that now. Barry?
Yeah, just a couple of comments with respect to massing. There was one comment about the Mizrahi building, and also about Jeff's comment about the Ashcroft development. One thing that Riel spoke to is the degree of stepping, but a very significant thing in the Ashcroft tunnel is that the higher building, the 9-story building, is on the south side of the street, and the lower building is 6 stories on the north side. It's like it's got it wrong in terms of the way they're flipped, and also it doesn't have any stepping whatsoever. The other part is difficult to find any connection between this building and the Mizrahi building. First of all, the corner courtyard, the Mizrahi building builds out to the corner, and we take the approach that we recess from the corner to celebrate what is the heart of Westboro. And I love the picture that shows the existing bike shops, because you can actually then imagine that being removed and preserved for public realm. And then the other part really is the amount of stepping that occurs not only on Richmond Road, but also stepping to the neighborhood behind. And I can guarantee you that the Mizrahi building does not have that level of stepping that follows the angular plane. So that's all I got for now.
Okay, thank you, Barry. Okay, moving on. Is the link between inside courtyard and corner plaza covered or open?
It's open. Oh, sorry. The link between the link isn't closed. It's on the ground level. But let me just go to that view. So this link in the center is the main floor. So if you imagine walking into any building, typically you have a front vestibule. And this idea is that this would become a glorified vestibule where you'd have controlled access into each of the retail spaces, and including the residential elevator lobby, but that you'd be able to walk into the building and then have access to some sort of screen that would allow you to, buzz in and take it from there. But there is, at a given, obviously at certain times, this will be locked, or you'll have to fog from outside. But during what you can imagine as business hours, this could remain open for people to access some of those retail spaces from within that lobby.
Okay, thank you. The recently constructed 4-story mixed-use building diagonally across on Richmond has been struggling to find tenants. How will you guarantee that your spaces will be filled and not gathering dust?
Yes, I mean, I guess the big thing is just at this point in the process, we just need to remain flexible, right? And looking at the polls, it sounds like people are very interested in the idea of retail stores on that ground floor, restaurants, cafes, pubs, all these other types of retail experiences. But maybe as the market continues to develop, as things continue to evolve, even with the public health crisis that we're in, what it means is taking another look at how that ground floor becomes programmed. And maybe it means looking at alternative uses for some of those parts of the ground level, and maybe that even means putting some residential on the ground floor, some ground-oriented residential units instead. So I think that the real answer at this point in the process is just to remain flexible and just to understand that it's early stages and things will continue to evolve over time.
Okay, thank you. If approved, this 9+ story building would set a precedent, height and massing for that intersection. Would you consider that similar sized buildings on the other 4 corners would constitute a desirable urban design approach that is appropriate for Westboro Village?
Kirsten, maybe you can speak to the full neighborhood in context here.
Sure. Just, I guess, speaking generally, of course, when it comes to planning, we don't consider a development as setting a precedent. Every application, of course, is looked at its own merits and how it contributes to the neighborhood and how it reflects the applicable policy. So I apologize for the noise in the background as well. So when you're looking at this secondary plan as well, if you look at the height schedule, the west and southwest corners are actually identified as being appropriate for 7 to 9 stories, as well as moving further west along Richmond. So the secondary plan does speak generally to heights, including increased heights. But as I mentioned, those would all be reviewed, at the time of an application and for how they contribute to the context and how they meet those planning policies overall, including massing and transition and appropriate urban design and contribution to the pedestrian environment, among others. So.
Okay, thank you. I like the design. It seems to blend well with older building designs. I also like the interior courtyard space. What is your best guess for shovels in the ground to start the build based on your timeline to have your applications into the city?
I can take that one. First of all, thank you very kindly for your positive feedback. So we're anticipating to submit our application at the end of May. What that means is the ZBA and SBA process will typically take anywhere between 10 to 12 months to complete. At that point, we'll apply for a building permit, and construction hopefully will start shortly thereafter. So we're looking at 2021. Is
that 2021 for construction or occupancy?
Construction.
So when would occupancy be after that, if you could guess?
So Barry's a little more experienced with how long the construction process takes, so I'll let him take that one.
I think a construction for this will probably take the better part of 2 years, probably 20 months to 2 years. And this is a project that wouldn't be ready to go until 2021. So if you're really looking in total, something like 3 years off before you would occupy this, the building would be occupied.
Okay, thanks, Barry. Jeff, the next question is for you. Jeff, where do you stand on this? Are you supporting or not supporting this development proposal?
This one I am not ruling out supporting. It is, I have a good idea of what this council is willing to approve. There are things around affordability, parking ratios, the step backs where I think, you know, there are probably some more conversations to be had. I want to get the feedback from the community. I am seeing this building being very similar to the one that went in that I just referenced at Rosemount and Wellington in terms of the way it looks. And I think if it can get the same kind of successful retail mix, so the building that went in at Rosemount attracted New Grocery, Stella Luna, Terra 20, and on a summer afternoon, it's really jumping in that area. I think it's made a positive contribution to the neighborhood. I do want to get some, you know, I want to do some more comparisons around the setbacks, but this one I am not ruling out supporting. I'm not saying I'll vote for it today, but normally I come into these open houses and I say to a lot of them, you know, I'm opposed to it. I've come into many of the Scott Street ones saying I'm opposed to it. I've been opposing a lot of buildings at planning committee and council of late, but the Barry Hoban design here is a step up from what we normally see from a lot of the developers. I am also increasingly cognizant of the fact that we need more rental housing. I don't want to pretend that this rental housing is going to be affordable to most people in Ottawa. I think that it's going to be higher end, and that's a discussion that CLV can have with you. But the fact that it's a rental building owned by a REIT means that it will probably be rental in almost perpetuity, which we need a lot more of. So I'm weighing a lot of different factors, and I'm thinking about, without laying all my cards on the table, you know, whether this is exactly the right proposal or not. But I do like a lot of what I'm seeing here, as opposed to many developments where it's clear to me that it's simply over intensification. I'm not ruling this one out on the basis of its height, just given the direction I know the city council is going, the new official plan is going, the discussion that we're going to be having next week at city council around expanding the urban boundary, the need for greater intensification, the proximity here to transit. There's a lot more here to talk about than your standard Westboro development application. I'll leave it there.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. Will the interior courtyard get any / much sunshine given it faces north?
Yeah, Al, do you want to speak a little bit?
So, very good question, and you know, this is something we thought about even in the early days. It is shaped by design of the building form and isn't intended to receive much direct sunlight. We're not relying on that sunlight to be a direct sunlight, I should say, but the ambient light that's created in the evening from light sort of reflecting off the top of the building and barreling down is quite effective, especially in the hot months of the year where people are actually seeking to be away from the sunlight, and especially when it's west, you know, that west light in the evening that is very hot with the direct light. So this is actually shielded from that direct sunlight, but does, as I mentioned, take advantage of the ambient light throughout. And it's going to be designed, special careful consideration for lighting. You know, we look at this bosque of trees, for example. We imagine uplighting into the trees, really creating an animated space using a high quality design lighting scheme for this space. And during the day, it is sheltered from the high winds, so it'll be quite comfortable. There's building step backs. If you look at the aerial here, the building step backs, that one-story element serves as a windbreak. So any wind sort of barreling down, so that breaks that tunnel of that wind from barreling down into the courtyard. So there's careful attention to building step backs within the courtyard to break down on that, or to actually make it a more enjoyable space. So yeah, I mean, we're not worried about it not receiving direct sunlight. It's still going to be high quality space.
Also, just if I could add a point there too, we kind of went back and forth on that as well. Given the nature of the design of the building and the way that it's shaped, you know, originally there we didn't have much there, but we saw it as a unique opportunity to really offer another way to program the space for the community to use. And, you know, just going off of Riel's points, I think that, you know, there are other ways of providing warmth to the space without necessarily using the sun. But it's just really an opportunity for another activated space to be used by the public and the residents of the community.
Okay, thank you. As Westboro Village will be implementing street paid parking, will you consider public paid parking like they do in the Westboro Station development?
Yeah, so that's certainly something that we're considering with this project. It's something actually that was in the 3 poll questions that were asked. And if you want to provide us feedback in those poll questions, feel free to go in, just click yes or no in there. But the short answer is we're certainly considering it. And that's part of our discussions with Councillor Leeper that we've been having to date as well, because I know that at a glance, the current parking ratio looks a little bit scary because it's showing, I think, 130 parking spots for 180 units or something like that. But again, with the consideration for some of those spots potentially being for paid parking, we want to be able to find a really good balance there.
Okay, thank you. This may be for Jeff, not 100% sure. Will OC Transpo be providing better bus service to Westboro to address the increased density of occupation? And they note that bus service has been a bit dodgy since LRT started running.
And so that is probably an entire other webinar. The bus service has absolutely become worse with the big changeover from LRT. We are slowly fixing that. The LRT itself is being slowly fixed. And 5 years from now, there's going to be LRT that gets to Westboro Station. So the routes are probably going to move all around again. It's difficult for me to say 5 years from now what local service will look like in Westboro when Westboro Station opens, when Dominion Station opens, when Cleary Station opens. All I can say is that in general, density equals service. The worst service in the city is to the least dense areas of the city. If the density increases in Westboro, OC Transpo is going to have little choice, or at least they'll be under a lot of pressure to improve the bus service. Right now, this would be served by 1, 2, I think 3 different buses. Service from the 11 might go back to Westboro when they reopen Westboro Station. Yeah, I think you'll see a slow increase in the quality of service downtown. And this is something that all 5 urban councillors are spending a lot of time talking to John Manconi about, is the effects of the most recent service changes due to LRT. We've all seen a decrease in the quality of the service in our neighborhoods. This building may or may not be approved. The future OC Transpo is not going to play into whether or not it gets approved or is recommended for approval. I'll just leave it there. My hope and fight will be to make sure that we get better OC Transpo service moving forward through the course of the next several years and past the opening of the Westboro Transit Station.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. We kind of answered this question before, but I'll read it out loud because I don't want anyone to feel like we're skipping over their questions. With the high level of vacancy in local condos, what makes your site more attractive to people looking to move into the neighborhood?
I think that the big piece here is just that that it's not a condo site, that it is a rental building is the proposed use. And I think what we're seeing in Ottawa right now is the real lack of rental units available for people in all neighborhoods, right? So I think that the big thing really at this point is just about getting some unit places to live available for people in all parts of the city, especially those that are supported by lots of different mixed uses of transit.
And also just to add to that, InterRent is a very well-seasoned rental housing operator, and so that is an attractive piece to anybody looking to move into the neighborhood.
Okay, thank you. There's 3 in a row that are basically comments. Someone says a small library like on Wellington would be nice. And there is also a comment that an Castro's would be good as one of the retail options, which I absolutely agree with. And then someone is asking, which we've already answered, is this intended to be a rental building? We've said yes. So I'll move on to the next question. What infrastructure improvements will be required in order to accommodate the increased resources such as water, sewer, etc., by the added families, retail, etc., taking into consideration the aged infrastructure?
Kirsten, maybe that's one that you can help field here.
Sure. So as part of the application process, the applicant will be required to correspond with the city and determine what the existing infrastructure is available for the site. And then they will model that based on the number of units that are proposed and develop a report on what that impact will be. And so that impact will be related to sanitary servicing and water servicing, as well as stormwater management. So in order to proceed, this development has to be able to be accommodated by the existing infrastructure. Now, with respect to the age of infrastructure, so the city itself has a very large asset management branch that monitors the age and the replacement schedule. So that's a separate component that's not related to the specific development, but to the city as a whole. Thanks.
If I can just say, one of the exercises, I think a lot of the people who are participating in the webinar tonight know that the city is undergoing its official plan. And whether we expand the urban boundary or not, that official plan is going to call for much greater intensification right across the city. Once the official plan is set, they will revisit what is called the Infrastructure Master Plan. The Infrastructure Master Plan takes a look at the capital projects that are necessary to sustain whatever level of growth is described by the official plan, and then that gets translated into projects that need to get done for which developers pay development charges. These folks will be paying development charges for this building so that the city stays on top of growing infrastructure needs and at the growth pace for the growth.
Okay, thank you. So now we're at the point where folks are referencing previous questions, so I apologize if this is a bit confusing. But sorry, there's a comment. The question about the street wall and answer was really important, and they're saying thank you. How long is construction expected to take, and will there be roads closed to accommodate construction? So I think we were discussing it's roughly a 2-year build. And on that note, from our office, if this development is approved, and once the site plan is approved, and once they are ready to move forward with construction, we always put a pre-construction meeting condition into the site plan. So we will be hosting a pre-construction meeting with residents of the community, and we'll be able to go over some of the finer details, like the length of the construction period and entry and egress to the site, and the phasing and any potential impacts. Usually developers don't quite know exactly how it's going to be built. So the question about the roads, I don't know if you folks can answer right now, but maybe you can.
Mark, I'm wondering if this is something that you can just touch upon a little bit. We might not have specifics at this point, but even just sort of generally what that process looks like in terms of coming up with the construction planning and road management.
Yeah, of course. So further down the line, we would prepare what's called the construction traffic management plan. And that looks at the volume of trucks, the number of employees, the site accesses, and ensures that all that is done not only safely, but using as much as possible the established trucking routes through the city of Ottawa, which generally coincide with the arterial road network. And so in that way, certainly a road closure, I think, would be considered a sort of last resort. We would rely on other tools in order to get construction traffic safely and conveniently to and from the site. But as has kind of been touched on, until we have the, sort of a refined plan, and where at that point, those details, we really don't know them yet. So it's hard to give specifics.
Just before I forget on that point, the City of Toronto has recently, I think, they're well on their way to making the traffic control plan part of the site plan process, which is something that I am a big fan of. So on all of these big developments moving forward, I'm going to be pushing as hard as I can to have the traffic control plan on the table before we approve a site plan.
And for sure, we can, things like the established trucking routes and the sort of big picture items are absolutely something that can be included right up front, because those are things that the City of Ottawa establishes, and we're sort of working within that framework.
The city staff have been helpful on me with me on that, and I'm hoping to have something from the council maybe even this year. The big concern that a lot of people in the ward have is a lot of the developments go and we're able to work out excellent pedestrian plans, for instance. But the one at the Trailhead building, so Scott and McRae, has been, really a 2-year nightmare for pedestrians and cyclists, and we'll be doing everything possible to try not to let that happen again.
Okay, I'm not trying to go out of order. We do only have about 12 minutes left scheduled, so I'm scrolling down because there's some additional construction questions really quick. Is construction being done in phases, or will all the buildings be built at once? That's the first one.
Barry, do you have any ideas at this stage how things might play out in terms of construction logistics?
In terms of construction logistics, I mean, I think one of the things is that we're building on a fair amount of the site. We have some small area for laydown, which is not the case with the McRae site. But there will be probably a partial street closing that'll be required. Definitely not Richmond Road, but perhaps Winona or parts of Winona that would allow us to lay down and do the construction. That's something that a seasoned general contractor will look at and have a plan for it. It's hard for us to kind of speculate how that might come together.
Thanks, Barry. And then, I think that, I mean, it's a single building, so I think that we would see that construction all happen at once in that sort of 2-year estimated period that we're looking at right now.
The second comment, while we're still on construction, it just says blasting 2 because there's bedrock underneath. I don't know if anyone wants to speak to blasting specifically or has any comments about it.
The only thing that I would say related to that would just be that as part of our process, we're going to do what's called the geotechnical investigation, and that's going to look at everything that's sort of below the grade level, so that we can have a really good idea of what's down there before any of the construction process starts, whether that's bedrock or soil or whatever else might be down there.
And again, once they're ready to move forward during the pre-construction meeting, we'll have more of those details refined, including like how long the blasting will go on for and what that means for nearby residents and all those kinds of things. So next question, moving off of construction. I like the initial concept designs. Curious as to why there are so many planned parking spaces when the site is 600 meters to 2 separate future LRT stations and so few bike parking relative to the total unit count. Great question.
Mark, do you want to speak to parking a little bit here?
Yeah, of course. So we've done quite a number of these sites that are within the TOD areas, and this often is a question that comes up because there is always that sort of conflict between the number of cars parked on the site versus the commuter traffic that a site generates. And what we've found is that while people are willing and are more than able to use transit and active modes to do their daily commuting, they still do want access to a private vehicle for recreational trips, visiting family, doing sort of longer distance trips or work trips, things of that nature. And so the parking is provided often for sort of longer term storage. So there are vehicles on the site, but they aren't used for that day-to-day commuting. The other kind of layer with this site is that given the mixed use, there has to be a balance between the retail and the residential portion, and that balance is still being worked out to see what the mix could be. In addition, I think as we mentioned earlier, or as was mentioned earlier, there is the potential for some public parking here to sort of utilize that parking as best as possible, as well as provide a service to the residents and limit the on-street parking that is sort of generated as a result of these retail sites. Speaking to the bike parking and that ratio, that's something that is still being looked at and worked out, and is one of the details that we're refining. Certainly, I think an increase is a benefit to the site. Given the proximity to LRT, the best way to utilize that LRT is good services for alternative non-auto modes. And providing those bike parking spaces is sort of a key piece of that. So that's something that we're helping advise Interreg on how to best provide that.
Okay, thank you. The next question is on a similar vein. So they say, I may have missed this earlier. How much parking is planned for this development and will it be open to the public? So we've touched on that. Maybe we want to reiterate how much parking is proposed and whether or not it will be public.
Yeah, so again, just because we're so early in the process here, we like the idea for some potential public parking, but we haven't really figured out any numbers yet in terms of the allocation, as Mark was saying.
And sorry, did you say how many planned parking spots there are?
Sorry, yes, that's just a couple slides before this. I think that we have 120 to 130 planned parking spots right now.
Okay, thank you.
There's a couple of things that I want to continue to chat with the developer about. The number of parking spots available to residents is sort of a key thing that I want to have more discussions about, and the affordable housing, the provision of affordable housing units within this building as well. But the parking ratio strikes me as being very high as well, unless a big chunk of that becomes publicly available parking.
Okay, I'll try to get through the last two questions. Why have the courtyard inside the buildings rather than at the corner with Winona and Richmond? Is there another interior courtyard currently we can compare this to?
I can go ahead and answer that. So it's a very good question. In fact, we're looking at a courtyard, as I mentioned, at the corner of Churchill and Richmond, but we have to remember that Richmond is very busy and very loud. And when you're talking about outdoor spaces that are comfortable to sit in, if you think of the Byward Market, where there's the courtyard restaurants that exist between George and York Street, those offer relief from the traffic and offer sort of more intimate inhabitable landscape spaces. Montreal is another great example. The city is, Old Port has a lot of restaurants that open up into courtyard spaces. There's numerous examples around the world that we can talk about, but locally, I think the closest examples are in the Byward Market. The squares that exist within the Byward Market that are accessible through various laneways are extremely intimate. They're away from the traffic noise, and they just provide a variety of outdoor inhabitable spaces rather than just relying on the street corners on Richmond.
Okay, thank you. And last question, unless anyone wants to type in any remaining questions, this is the last one in the queue. Since this is supposed to be a rental building, do you know if there will be any safeguards in place to prevent the units from becoming Airbnb units?
So I can take this one. One of the benefits to having a season rental housing operator is that this is something that's not allowed. So you can be rest assured there would be no Airbnbs within our units.
Thank you. So I have no more questions in my queue. Does anyone want to wrap up? I have some wrap up comments, but other people may have wrap up comments as well.
Yeah, I think that the last thing on behalf of the applicant is just to thank everybody again. I mean, Fiona, Jeff, I think that this went really well. It was great to hear everybody's feedback, be able to do a bit of a question and answer there, and also be able to hear Rael's take on the design here. So thanks everybody. I really appreciate it. I know that it's a little bit unconventional, but it was great to be able to do this in spite of everything that's going on. And I do hope that everybody is staying safe and staying healthy.
I'd like to just further add to that we're really looking forward to becoming part of this community, and we're looking forward to receiving more comment and feedback and working with the city and the community to ultimately arrive at the best possible development for the neighborhood.
For me, I really am interested in hearing your thoughts on this. If you want to write to Fiona and I, and you can certainly write to Fiona and I for comments that are, simply asking questions that aren't intended for the applicants. But I think the applicants would love to hear your feedback as well. I just had a quick question. When Evan or Kirsten, when are you thinking of actually applying for this building? I may have missed that. I apologize.
It's okay, I can take that one. So we're looking to submit at the end of May. That's when we're hoping.
Thank you. So yeah, Fiona and I will certainly take your comments. And I just want to say I am thinking seriously about doing this format more often. I think we got through a lot of questions without me getting confused about who's next, and I hope everybody's comfortable at home. Many of us in pajamas probably. Thank you very much for joining us. Fiona, I'll let you wrap it up.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. So just to touch on those points, this is the first time we've done this, so if you have any comments about the format, please feel free to email them to our office so we can take them into consideration as we do these for the foreseeable future. As Jeff said, definitely send the comments on this development. Right now, send them to Jeff and I. There is an assigned planner, but since it's not an active application, we don't necessarily need to send him the comments yet. It will be formally submitted at some point, and at that point, you will want to send the comments to the planner. Just wanted to make sure that that's 100% clear. And we're recording this, and we will host it on YouTube somehow, and Jeff will probably put the link in his newsletter. So if any of your neighbors were interested and want the info, we will have that recording, and then once it's submitted on DevApps, then you'll be able to go through and look at the details of the development later. So I think those were my comments, and yeah.
Thank you very much, Gitchisibi. Thank you to all the panelists, Evan, Josie, Brian, Mark, Rael, Barry, Fiona. Thank you very much for your help on this, as always. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Good night.